Have you ever found yourself thinking, why does it feel like I am carrying this relationship? You're the one that's remembering the birthdays. You're remembering all the appointments. You're planning the vacations. You're handling the events. You're buying the gifts. You're managing the calendar for everyone. You're noticing maybe what the kids need, what your partner needs. You're checking in on everyone's emotions and making sure that everything gets done. Meanwhile, every time you ask your partner to do something or to help out, it somehow ends up being either half finished, forgotten, or maybe not even done at all. And it comes back to being your responsibility anyway. So eventually you stop asking, not because you want to do everything alone, but because it honestly feels easier. Overfunctioning and weaponized incompetence are two people unknowingly trapped in this unhealthy dynamic. It's a dance. And if that dance continues, one person slowly becomes very resentful and very overwhelmed, and the other person slowly stops growing. And before long, you've lost something that neither of you meant to lose: respect, traction, and the feeling that you're actually partners. So today I want to help you understand why this pattern even exists and why it develops, why both people unknowingly keep it going and it perpetrates, and how you can finally step out of it together for good. I remember a conversation with a couple recently that has stayed with me for a long time. She looked at me and she said, "I'm exhausted, absolutely exhausted." And not because she had little kids, not because work was overwhelming or difficult. She was exhausted because she felt like she had to carry the entire weight of the relationship and carrying the weight of everybody's life. She remembered every single thing for everybody, managed all the emails, all the doctor's appointments, all the scheduling, all the calendar, all the vacations, the grocery order, the family event, every conversation that needed to happen. She did it. She knew when people were struggling. She knew where everybody was going, and she knew everything before they even said a word. Then she looked at her husband and she quietly just said, "I don't want your help anymore." He looked completely confused. He was shocked. "I help all the time. What are you talking about?" She nodded. I know you do, but I don't want help. I want a partner." And I don't know, the room got pretty quiet because underneath everything she had just said, there wasn't even any anger. It was loneliness. It was feeling like she did not have someone standing beside her. She felt like she was carrying the entire weight, everything alone. And her husband looked a little surprised and then, frankly, kind of heartbroken because he wasn't trying to leave everything to her. He honestly loves her. He believed that he was contributing. He thought he was doing his part. And that's when I realized they weren't arguing about dishes or laundry or schedules. They were actually talking about something that is much deeper. They had quietly fallen into roles that neither of them intentionally chose. Hi, I'm Jenn Pinkerton, and I'm a psychotherapist and a connection expert. I help people understand the psychology behind why they love the way they do, so they can stop repeating painful relationship patterns that really affect your relationship and start building healthier, more emotionally connected ones. So today we're going to talk about, maybe unpack one of the most common dynamics that I see in couples and in relationships. One partner is slowly carrying more and more and more responsibility, and the other one slowly carries less and less and maybe none. And neither person planned for that. Neither person really wants that. But these are roles that people get stuck in. They become identities. And over time, it creates resentment and exhaustion, defensiveness, and a relationship where both people feel really misunderstood. We're going to talk about why this pattern even develops and how it quietly damages the emotional safety, and then what both partners can actually do differently to create a relationship that feels like a true partnership. So the first thing I want to share with you, and I want you to understand, is that this pattern almost never starts because one person is lazy. And that's a huge misnomer because everybody believes that's the truth. But actually, it also almost never starts because the other person enjoys doing everything alone. It usually begins with really good intentions. One partner is naturally responsible. They might be a type A person, and they notice something needs to be done, so they do it and they get it done. Maybe they pay the bills. Maybe it's because they're due. They just know. Maybe the schedule, the appointments, they're just good at that. And maybe because no one else has ever done it. Maybe they pack the lunches because they know what everyone likes and they know they can do it right and get it done, or they're scared they'll be forgotten if someone else does it. And at first it feels helpful. It feels in charge. It feels loving. It feels responsible. But something quietly begins to happen. The more one person steps in, then the fewer opportunities the other person has to step up. And without realizing it, one partner becomes the manager and the other one becomes the assistant. And then you have masculine and feminine energy that can play here too. And one partner is carrying them in a load and the other begins waiting for direction. Not because either of them wanted that, but because that's what the relationship slowly adapted to. And here's what makes this really difficult. The overfunctioning partner becomes increasingly exhausted. The underfunctioning partner often feels increasingly criticized or maybe useless. And both people feel misunderstood. Neither one feels appreciated. Neither one feels respected. And both of them wonder, how did we even get here? But the answer is very slowly, one small interaction at a time. Now, before I go any further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever actually measured the health of your relationship or the health of your own relational self? Most couples know that they're frustrated. They know that something feels off or isn't working, but they can't identify the patterns that are quietly shaping their relationship. That's exactly why I created the Pinkerton Relational Health Index. This is a quiz, an assessment that you can take, and I want you to think of it as a blueprint reading for your relational health and your relationship. It helps you understand where your relationship is thriving and where it's probably struggling, and the hidden dynamics that influence everything from communication and conflict to trust and emotional safety, intimacy, friendship, and a lot more. So because awareness is really always the first step before change, it's important to understand where you are because you can't change a pattern that you don't recognize. So take the PRHI using the link below. And if you're ready to move beyond awareness and actually step into change, changing those patterns, I'd love to work with you. And you can reach me below through my Relationship Blueprint Intensive. This is a private 30-day transformational program for individuals and for couples who are really ready to stop repeating and stop surviving their relationship and instead start creating one where they can actually thrive. Okay, now let's talk about why overfunctioners unknowingly make this cycle even harder to break. The next thing I want you to understand is this. If you're the overfunctioner, I want you to hear me loud and clear with this and with compassion. Most overfunctioners aren't controlling people. They're actually anxious people. And there's a difference. Working with so many individuals and couples and understanding where they sit and what their experience is, I've realized that overfunctioning usually isn't about wanting control at all. It's just about trying to create safety and certainty. And when your nervous system has learned that things don't feel safe unless you're the one managing it and you're the one doing it, it becomes incredibly difficult to step back. You tell yourself, I'll just do it. It's easier to handle it. I don't want to take the time to explain it to you. I'll get it done faster if I take care of it. And maybe that's true at first. But over time, then something quietly begins to happen. Every time you step in, before your partner has the chance to step up or to figure it out, you are unintentionally sending them a message that says, I've got it. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. And eventually, your partner starts to listen to you. They believe you. And maybe not because they're trying to avoid responsibility. Maybe that's because this has become the rhythm of your relationship, the pattern in your relationship, the roles in your relationship. And this can be really frustrating to hear because if you're thinking, well, if I don't do it, it's not going to get done. Sometimes you're right. But I want to ask you to ask yourself this question. Has your partner truly been given the opportunity to own the responsibility? Or have you been rescuing them before they ever even experience the opportunity to try and then maybe the consequence? Because consequences are important. And that's a hard question. Rescuing feels like loving until it isn't. And I remember working with another couple where the wife told me I do everything. And she managed the finances, the scheduled every appointment, handled everything that was needed in this family. And she had a lot of resentment. Her husband finally said, I don't even know where to start anymore because every time I try, you've already done it for me. And she looked at him and said, because I can't trust you to do it. And then he replied, you've never really let me learn. Neither one of them was trying to hurt the other. They had simply become trapped in this cycle and in this role. And she had become indispensable and he had become increasingly dependent. And both of them hated those roles. So one of the hardest things for an overfunctioner to do is to tolerate discomfort. That's back to that anxiety aspect of it. Because stepping back means something might not get done or it might not get done my way. And someone might forget. Your partner might do it totally differently or slower or not as well as you would. And your nervous system hates that uncertainty. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes the healthiest thing that you can do for your relationship is actually allow someone else to struggle. Not because you want them to struggle or to fail or to experience pain, but because that's how people grow. Think about raising children for a minute. If we tied their shoes forever, would they ever learn how to tie their own shoes? We have to let people have an opportunity to either succeed or fail. And if we always finish your kids' homework because we want it done correctly, they would never develop confidence. They would not understand how to trust their own instincts. So growth almost always requires someone being allowed to struggle. Think about your growth in life. You have struggled and you grow from it. We're the same. The most loving thing we can do sometimes is to resist rescuing. Not because we don't care, but because we actually do. And now before anybody misunderstands me, I am not talking about abandoning your responsibilities. I'm not saying, you know what, just stop doing it all. Everybody doesn't need lunch. Nobody needs to plan a vacation. That's not what I mean. We're not hoping for the best. But I'm talking about creating a shared ownership, having an honest conversation with your partner that clearly defines responsibilities between the two of you, allowing a natural consequence to happen, and trusting that your partner is, of course, capable of learning instead of assuming that they're always going to disappoint you. This also requires you to let go a little bit of how it must be done. If one person's carrying everything, then both people lose. One person loses peace, and the other person loses the opportunity to become more capable. And neither outcome is going to create a healthy relationship. Overfunctioning may solve today's problem, but it often creates tomorrow's resentment. So now I want to look at the other side of this coin, this pattern, because if you're the person who's actually been underfunctioning, I don't want you to tune out here. There's something really important that I want you to actually understand also. I want to talk about the other side here. If you've been listening and you're realizing that maybe you're raising your hand thinking, I might be the person who is underfunctioning, I don't want you to hear this as a criticism. I want you to be curious, and I want you to hear it as an invitation, because I don't believe most people intentionally become underfunctioners. Sometimes it starts because your partner naturally just takes charge. They take over. Okay. Sometimes you're maybe never taught how to manage certain things. You just don't know what to do, and you're not sure about those responsibilities, and maybe that came from growing up. Sometimes you become so accustomed to someone else doing everything for you that you stop noticing how much effort they're really putting in and how much they're carrying. And sometimes, if we're really going to be honest here, it's simply easier to let somebody do everything else, right? But whatever the reason is, over time, something is going to begin to happen that most people don't talk about. The overfunctioning partner isn't just carrying more responsibility and more load. They're also carrying more mental load. They're anticipating problems before they even happen. They are living in this hypervigilant stage, keeping track of everything, managing everyone, making decisions, remembering every single detail. And they're also holding the emotional climate of the family together. And after a while, they don't just feel tired. They begin feeling alone. So that's the part I wish more people would understand. Because even when your partner starts to feel like they're parenting you instead of parenting just the kids, and instead of partnering with you like they would like, something begins changing inside that relationship. And it is not overnight. It is gradual. But respect is going to start to slip, and attraction is absolutely going to change, because if your partner is mothering you, they're not going to be attracted to you. And that's not because they don't love you anymore. It's because it's very difficult to feel deeply partnered with someone that you're constantly having to manage. Nobody should manage anybody else. And one of the things I hear over and over again is you don't need them to be everything. I just want to know I'm not carrying everything by myself, people say. So think about that. Most people aren't asking for perfection. We don't expect that. We're not perfect. Nobody is. But they're asking for partnership. They're asking for someone who notices what needs to be done without always having to be told. And someone who takes initiative. Someone who is willing to try even if they fail. Someone who follows through. Someone who shares the emotional weight of building a life together. And that is very different than simply, helping, simply being a helper. Because helping implies this is really your responsibility and I'm just going to assist you. And no one wants an assistant. Partnership says this belongs to both of us. Let's divide and conquer. And I think that's a really big shift that couples need to make. So stop thinking in terms of helping. Start thinking in terms of shared weight and shared ownership. And there's another piece of this that I think is also important to talk about. Because sometimes underfunctioning slowly chips away at confidence. And the less responsibility you carry, then the less capable you begin to think you actually are. And then, of course, your partner trusts you even less. So they step in even more. Do you see where this is going? This gives you even fewer opportunities to build confidence, to understand that you can handle that. And now you're both stuck. And one person feels overwhelmed and the other person feels inadequate. Neither person is intended for that to happen. It's just where it landed. It's just where the pattern led. So that's why I often tell people that patterns are so very powerful because they make sense to both people. The overfunctioner thinks, I'm just trying to keep everything together, just trying to get everything done. And the underfunctioner thinks, well, they've got it handled, right? I don't need to do anything. Neither person's trying to damage the relationship, but they're simply responding to the system that they've created together. So I also want to say something that might be hard to hear. If your partner has asked you repeatedly to take more initiative, to notice more, to carry more, to stop waiting to be told, please don't dismiss that as nagging. Try to hear what's underneath it with some curiosity. Most of the time, they're not saying you're failing. They're probably just saying, I'm drowning. And that is a distinction. That's a different message. And when you hear the pain underneath those words and you can see the stress on your partner, it's much easier to respond with empathy instead of defensiveness. The goal isn't to help your partner carry the load. The goal is to make sure they were never carrying it in the first place alone. So if both people are unintentionally keeping this pattern alive, then how do you actually break it? Because awareness is always important. That's the first step. But awareness alone doesn't change anything. It doesn't change a relationship. So let's talk about what does. So how do you actually break this pattern? But the good news, patterns can be changed, but only if both people are willing to stop playing the roles that they've adapted to, the roles that they have been assigned. The overfunctioner has to stop believing that if I don't do it, everything will fall apart. And that's some anxiety work to deal with in that too. And then the underfunctioner has to stop believing someone else will eventually take care of it. And both people have to become uncomfortable. And that is why change feels so hard, because none of us like to be uncomfortable. The overfunctioner has got to tolerate things being done differently or maybe not nearly as well as they would. And the underfunctioner has to tolerate the discomfort of actually taking on more responsibility. And neither feels natural at first because that's not your role. But that's how every healthy pattern begins. So one of the conversations that I encourage couples to have is surprisingly simple. It's not going to be, why don't you ever help? Instead, it's going to be, what responsibilities belong to each of us? Let's sit down and figure that out. Notice the difference? The first option started with blame, but this one starts with partnership. And healthy couples, they don't assume responsibilities. They define them together. They revisit them often together. They adjust them as life changes. Because what worked when you had toddlers are not going to work later when you have teens. And let's say you don't have children. What worked when you're young at a certain stage of your life versus when you are way more in your career-focused mindset is going to be different then too. Healthy relationships stay flexible and continue to converse about it. Another shift I encourage couples to make is also this. Stop waiting until you're resentful to speak up. Resentment is usually delayed communication in disguise. And by the time someone says, I'm doing everything around here, and they're so frustrated, they've been feeling this, overwhelmed for probably months, if not years. And healthy relationships don't do that. They don't wait until somebody has to break. They don't wait until one person explodes. They have small, healthy conversations continually on the small frustrations before they become big resentments. And that is emotional maturity. And if you're the overfunctioner, I really want to challenge you with something. The next time you feel yourself wanting to jump in and handle it, pause. Ask yourself, am I helping or am I rescuing? Because there is a difference. Helping empowers someone. Rescuing unintentionally communicates, I don't believe that you can even do this. So sometimes the greatest gift that you're going to be able to give your partner is believing that they're capable enough to figure it out themselves. They are an adult. You married this adult. And even if they don't do it exactly the way you would, and even if if you're the underfunctioner, I want to challenge you too. Don't wait to be asked. Look around, notice the world around you. Ask yourself, what would make my partner's life a little easier today? Not because they asked, but because you're a team, you're a unit. And one of the most attractive qualities in a relationship is not perfection, it is initiative. It's being someone that your partner doesn't have to manage. Someone who actually notices, someone who is dominant, someone who follows through, someone who shares the weight of building a life together. And that's beautiful. That's a partnership. I tell couples something that surprises them on this sometimes, which is competence builds attraction. And that's not because competence is just sexy by itself, or it can be, but because competence actually communicates a message that you're not alone. I've got this. You don't have to carry it all alone. And that is establishing emotional safety, which I die on a hill on talking about. Think about how calming that feels, how relieving that feels. When someone consistently shows you, I see what needs to be done, honey, and I will take responsibility for my part. Your nervous system can relax. You can take a deep breath, and that is that emotional safety. Not because chores got done, but because partnership was experienced, and that is also connection. So here's a practical exercise I want you to try this week. Instead of asking, what do you need help with, which puts the burden on someone to tell you, teach you, show you, ask, what mental load are you carrying that I am not even seeing? That question is going to change things because it acknowledges something that overfunctioners have been longing and longing to hear, which is, I see how much you've been carrying. And sometimes being seen is the beginning of finally feeling supported. Healthy relationships aren't built when one person carries everything. They are built when both people carry each other. So before we finish, I want to leave you with one final thought that I hope changes the way that you think about partnership and you think about your relationship. I want you to think about this as if you've really been listening today. You might have recognized yourself as the overfunctioner or the underfunctioner. You may have realized that you have been not pulling your weight. Or maybe you saw pieces of yourself in both of them, depending on the situation. And if that's true, I don't want you to leave this video trying to figure out, whose fault it is. Who can we blame? Because fault doesn't create change. Awareness does. And the truth is most couples don't intentionally create this pattern at all. And they're slowly drifting into it. Couples just adapt. And if that's where you are today, I want you to hear this. Patterns can be unlearned. Not overnight. And not through one conversation, but through hundreds of small moments together where both people choose something different. The choice is yours. The underfunctioner is going to choose trust instead of rescue. And the underfunctioner is going to choose initiative instead of waiting. And both people are choosing curiosity instead of defensiveness. That is how relationships change. Not through some huge grand gesture, but through repeated moments of turning toward each other, turning inward to each other. And I also want to say something to the overfunctioners. You do deserve rest. You deserve partnership. You deserve to feel like someone is right there with you, standing beside you, instead of behind you. And to the underfunctioners, you are more capable than you think. You're more capable than this pattern has allowed you to believe. And your partner does not need perfection, and they don't need an assistant. They need to know that they're not carrying this life that you've built together alone. And that is what partnership feels like. So to recap today, we have talked about how weaponized incompetence happens and how overfunctioning, and how they're not these separate problems. They're basically two people unintentionally keeping this same unhealthy relationship pattern alive. You also learned that overfunctioning often grows out of anxiety rather than control. And that's sometimes really shocking to people when you think about that. You learn that underfunctioning often develops slowly inside the relationship rather than because someone is simply just lazy. And we talked about the hidden cost of carrying the mental load and why competence builds trust, respect, and attraction, and how both partners have to change the system. The system must change, not just each other. But most importantly of all, you learn that the goal isn't to help each other. The goal is to become true partners once again. And the healthiest relationships, they aren't built when one person is carrying the other person. They're built when both people become strong enough to carry the relationship together. So if today's conversation helped you and you saw some patterns that you have been living in for years and you're imagining what could change, or maybe you don't know how to change that and you're struggling to think about, I don't know how that conversation is going to go, and you want to figure out more about these patterns and how they developed in the first place, that's exactly why I have my Relationship Blueprint Intensive. It's 30 days, and this is a program where we can transform your relationship. And I work with individuals and couples often on this to uncover all of these unconscious patterns that quietly shape their relationship. We can do that, and we can heal attachment wounds, create emotional safety, strengthen a relationship, increase intimacy and deepen that, and help couples build relationships where they no longer have to survive. They can actually truly thrive. So if you're ready to stop repeating all these painful patterns, then you can reach me below and we can work on that together. There's more information in the description. So now I want you to think about the next video, because one of the questions that I get asked all the time is this: Jen, how do I know if I'm dating someone who is emotionally healthy, who is emotionally mature, not someone who says the right things, and not someone who comes or maybe seems emotionally aware in the beginning, but then later all that changes. Someone who truly has the emotional capacity and maturity to build a healthy relationship. So stay tuned for that next video, and you'll find all about it here. See you there.